Good evening. The 2017 Presidential Lecture Series will now begin. Our presiding official for this evening's program is alumna Dr. Daphne Chamberlain, Dean of the Division of Social Sciences and coordinator of the Civil Rights and Social Justice Initiatives here at Tougaloo College. Dr. Chamberlain, please.
Good evening. I would like to take this opportunity to welcome you all to historic Tougaloo College, and the program is ready to begin. But before we move forward, we would like to make just a few announcements before we hear from our guest speaker. At this time, if you all would please silence all electronic devices. And because this is such a beautiful audience, I would like to also inform you that this 2017 Presidential Lecture Series is also being live streamed. So please and thank you. Silence those electronic devices, and we thank you all for your cooperation. Now, of course, for those of you who know or are familiar with our guest speaker, and for those of you who aren't, he is a native of Mississippi. He is a son of the Mississippi soil. And Dr. Glaude, we welcome you home. Again, my name is Daphne Chamberlain, and it is my distinct pleasure and honor to serve as your presiding official for this evening. And of course, this is a very special evening. But the printed program will proceed as follows, with an opening musical selection, and we invite you all to join in as we sing the Black National Anthem. Afterwards, followed by the chaplain of Tougaloo College, Dr. Larry Johnson, followed by a welcome from the 2017-2018 Student Government Association President, Ms. Kiera Reed. So we will begin now with the opening selection, and we ask that you join in, and that will be followed by Dr. Johnson and Ms. Reed, respectively. So if you all would please join in as Dr. Wilder proceeds.
Please be seated. For the occasion, let me share with you a reading from the Old Testament book of Micah, 6th chapter, the 8th verse. He has told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. Let us pray. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thank you. Thank you for bringing us thus far along the way. We thank you for this evening. We thank you for our speaker. We thank you for these times, Father. Yes, challenging as they are. Yes, we were born for such a time as this. From the very beginning, that evening of creation, justice has been the essence of your spirit. And throughout history, you have called us. You have called us to be the merchants of justice. You have called us out of darkness into the light. You have called us to be instruments of your peace and of your healing. Forgive us, Lord. Forgive us for not heeding your call and for chasing after our own gods. Forgive us. Bring us back to that place, that right relationship, not only with you, but the courage to live out what it means to love God, neighbor, and self. In Christ Jesus' name, amen.
In a real sense, all life is interrelated. All men are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I cannot be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be, and you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality. Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Good evening to President Hogan, members of the Board of Trustees, faculty, staff, distinguished speaker, honored guests, friends, alumni, and fellow students. It is an honor and a great privilege to welcome you to the historic Woodworth Chapel. It is on these hallowed grounds, in this very building, at this same podium, that several iconic individuals stood and delivered faith-strengthening words that issued a call to action. This call was answered by courageous men and women, including our very own Tougaloo 9, Congressman Benny G. Thompson, Joyce Ladner, Joan Trumpier Mulholland, and the recently named President and CEO of the NAACP, Derek Johnson. Today, we must answer a similar call. We recognize we are the future leaders that must affect change, and we boldly accept our role and responsibility. Your support is appreciated and requested because it is on your shoulders that we stand and bring about a dominant world democracy. Today's guest lecturer is Eddie S. Glaude, Jr., an individual well-versed in African American studies and social justice. It is comforting to have a former HBCU Student Government Association president in our midst. On behalf of the entire student body, I, Kiara Reed, the president of the Student Government Association for the 2017-2018 school year at the historic Tougaloo College, bring you greetings.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson and Ms. Reed. Next on the program, we will have our occasion by Dr. Dolores Bolden Stamps, who serves as the Vice President for Institutional Advancement here at Historic Tougaloo College. And her occasion will be followed by a musical selection from Tougaloo's own Mr. Andre Bennett. Dr. Stamps.
Thank you, Dr. Chamberlain. What an awesome sight as I look out at this audience and prepare to give you this occasion. I am so very moved by just your presence. Noted author, activist, intellectual giant, and truth seeker James Baldwin once stated, and I quote, "There's never a time in the future in which we work out our salvation. The challenge is always in the moment. The time is always now." This quote so aptly frames this occasion and this moment in history. Throughout its 148-year history, Tougaloo College has stood in the vanguard of the ongoing struggles for justice and equality. And as such, it has always responded to the challenges in the moment, from emancipation to Jim Crow to the Civil Rights Movement, Black Lives Matters, modern-day slavery, and on to the plethora of social justice issues that we are well aware of. So the time is always now. So it is on the eve of the 150th anniversary of Tougaloo College, we have boldly announced the convening of a 2-year-long critical examination and conversations on social justice and racial equity in the 21st century. Again, Tougaloo College has come to the forefront. We have envisioned that this series of conversations would connect people to issues in ways that will promote greater understanding, acceptance of differences, and yes, we hope that these conversations will help to manifest a real transformation in racial and social justice. We also hope that through these conversations that we will expose our learning community, and especially our students, to these mindful and thoughtful, provoking exchanges of ideas. And hopefully they will inspire each of you to always harness your resources and your powers to promote a more just, equitable, and inclusive society, and that you too will respond to the challenges of the moment. Tonight's presidential lecture, as I have stated, is indeed historic. It represents the inaugural conversation, and we are just so very, very honored to have as our speaker the renowned Dr. Eddie Glaude. His mere presence here tonight symbolizes, affirms the college's time-honored commitment and leadership in the ongoing quest for justice and equality. Ladies and gentlemen, the occasion.
There's no one else to turn to but you, yeah. You're the only answer to the situation that we've gotten ourselves into. So, Master, won't you please come down and give us a helping hand? Yeah, 'cause we need you. We need you right now. There's a lot of people going hungry, 'cause they can't get nothing to eat. There's a lot of people going naked, 'cause they even got shoes to put on their feet. So Master, won't you please come down and give us a helping hand? Yeah, 'cause we need you. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. We need you right now. Right now. Right now, Lord, yeah. We need you. Ooh, yes, we need you. We need you right now. I said, man, it's gotten out of hand with his evil way. Can't you see? He isn't strong enough. Just a little bit more each and every day. So Master, won't you please come down and give us, oh Lord, a helping hand? Yes, 'cause we need you, yes we do, yeah. We need you right now. Right now, Lord, we need you. Yes, we do need you. Say we need you. We need you right now. Yeah. Right now, Lord. Right now. Said we need you. Oh, we need you. Say we need you. We need you. We need you right now. We need you right now. We need you right now. Said we need you right now. Said we need you. Yes, we need you right now.
Thank you, Dr. Stamps. And of course, when Andre sings, everybody listens, even my baby. So let us please give Andre another rousing round of applause. Mr. Bennett is one of our very own talented international students from Kingston, Jamaica. And of course, that was an extremely wonderful performance. And Andre, we thank you for that. Thank you. Now, the time has come for us to begin the first of many critical conversations on social justice and racial equity. And here to introduce our inaugural conversation guest lecturer is Tougaloo's own, Reverend Reginald Buckley. Reverend Buckley is the senior pastor at Cade Chapel Missionary Baptist Church here in Jackson, Mississippi, and he's also a 1994 alumnus of this historic institution. So if you would please join me in welcoming to the podium Reverend Reginald Buckley.
To President Hogan, to members of the Board of Trustees, faculty and staff, students and friends of our dear Eagle Queen. What a distinct pleasure and an extreme honor it is to have with us today one of the Academy's brightest minds and clearest voices, whose thoughtful articulation of race, religion, and politics has catapulted him onto both national and international stages. With keen insight and with piercing polemics, Dr. Eddie Glaude makes Mississippi proud as he engages in the kinds of intellectual debates that challenge Americans to act, to think, and to live differently in this complex world. We've watched him be so bold as a public intellect to call out racists, as well as the institutions and the systems that house them, and yet also be willing to challenge that which he cherishes. So when he dared to pose the question in 2010, is the black church dead? It stirred quite the controversy, but led to quite a conversations that ultimately helped conscientious pastors and congregations to grapple with and reimagine what the prophetic black church is and means in this present age. Now, it is said that prophets are without honor in their own country, but tonight we want to change that notion. While there's been no public calling to this preaching ministry for Dr. Glaude that I'm aware of, you may correct me. He does stand in the tradition of the prophets who spoke truth to power. And we at Tougaloo honor that. He's a Morehouse man, but he is ours. Moss Point, Mississippi, born and raised, a lover of Bobby Blue Bland, sweet potato pies, pinto beans, and hoe cakes. He is ours. The William S. Todd Professor of Religion and African American Studies at Princeton University, Dr. Glaude, is chair of the Department of African American Studies, a department that came into being under his tenure as chair. He is ours. He holds a master's degree in African American Studies from Temple University, a PhD in religion from Princeton University. He is ours. He's been a visiting scholar at Amherst College and Harvard. In 2011, he delivered Harvard's Du Bois Lectures, and in 2015, he was awarded an honorary doctorate from Colgate University. He is ours. Author of numerous articles, 2 edited volumes, and guest columnist for the New York Times and the Huffington Post, he is ours. A brother who can take the folk theology of Fannie Lou Hamer and inspire a new generation of youth and young activists to resist those voices who urge us to settle for the world as it is. He is ours. And so I present to you our own HBCU-educated, Mississippi-celebrated, and I dare say a scholar who has been consecrated to the ministry of academic activism. I present to you Dr. Eddie S. Glaude, Jr.
Bye.
Reverend Buckley, I just wish my mama was here and my daddy were here to hear that. I wish my great-grandmother was here. I'm going to call her name Ruby Wilson, Russell Wilson. I wish Bernice Glaude and Herman Glaude were here to hear those words, because I am a reflection of them. I see so many Moss Point people out here. It's so good to see y'all. I even see my Auntie Carol, all the way from Moss Point. You know, Earl Sanders is a legend in Moss Point. Y'all know that, right? Had one of the hardest fastballs in it. No one could hit it. So it's good to see you, Earl. President Hogan, it's an honor to be at Tougaloo. And Dr. Stamps made it possible with that phone call. I believe this is the first time, Dr. Chamberlain, that I've stepped on this campus. And as I was listening to all the speakers, chills ran down my spine. This is hallowed ground. I wouldn't be who I am if it wasn't for the struggles, weren't for the struggles and sacrifice on this campus, Mr. Bradford. You opened the doors for a person like me from a small town on the coast to imagine myself in the grandest possible terms. And so here I am at Tougaloo. I'm going to take a little bit of your time. Is that okay? I decided I was going to try to show out for you. So I'm going to jump straight into this. Is this okay? All right, let's go. Y'all ready? And they tried to throw me out of Morehouse twice. James Kloppenberg's massive new book, Toward Democracy, The Struggle for Self-Rule in European and American Thought, ends with a chapter entitled The Tragic Irony of Democracy. The tragic irony of democracy. It is the culmination of a dense and detailed history of the tensions and contradictions that constitute the development of democracy in the modern world. And it is a story that figures democracy in ethical terms, not simply political ones. As he writes, rather than thinking of democracy exclusively in terms of political or even economic or social arrangements, we should think of it as an ethical ideal. Modern democracy is rooted in the shared assumption that all citizens should have the capacity to shape their own lives within boundaries established by the standards and traditions of their communities, and that all citizens should be able to participate equally in shaping those standards and revising those traditions, end quote. At the heart of the development of democracy, Kloppenberg argues, are the principles of popular sovereignty, autonomy, and equality, and the related premises of deliberation, pluralism, and reciprocity. And the story he tells about all of this is quite fascinating and really, really long. I mean, it's a big book. Now, the tragic irony, though, is that our efforts to instantiate these principles and make real the premises as he's outlined them all too often unleash forces that undermine democracy. Or as he puts it, generate, quote, other pressures that produce new and unanticipated forms of dependency and hierarchy. A close reading of the Lincoln-Douglas debates anchors the concluding chapter, and I take it, for him at least, it illustrates the irony. Now, I don't want to bore you with the details, but in that chapter we get the sense of the different ideas of democracy animating the views of Abraham Lincoln and Douglas, right? With the central question at the heart, are individuals free to do whatever they choose, or should moral limits constrain their choices? In exploring the question, Kloppenberg argues with particular attention to Lincoln's October 16, 1854 address in Peoria, Illinois, that although Lincoln hated the spread of slavery and condemned it as a monstrous injustice, he nevertheless held noxious views about black people's capacities. I'm trying to get somewhere. Just walk with me. See, oftentimes we just want to be entertained, but I'm not going to do that. So Lincoln held noxious views about black people's capacities. Right? He certainly did not view them, us, as equal to whites. Think about Lincoln's speech on the Dred Scott decision in 1857 and his response to those like Stephen Douglas who accused him of supporting interracial marriage. Quote, "There was a natural disgust," this is Lincoln, "there was a natural disgust in the minds of nearly all white people to the idea of an indiscriminate amalgamation of the white and black races," end quote. Or the July 17th, 1858 speech in Springfield, quote, "What I would most desire would be the separation of the white and black races," end quote. But Lincoln, slavery was indeed a, quote, "moral and social and political evil that deformed American democracy." But white racism, deprived of what the political scientist George K. Tibb so aptly describes as its most terrible manifestation, slavery, white racism was simply a natural consequence of the obvious superiority of white people. Now, Kloppenberg doesn't linger long here. This is only a piece of a much longer and, to my mind, compelling claim about a perpetual balancing act in this country. Democracy works best when majorities are constrained by respect for individual liberty, when liberties, quote, "are exercised in the context of rough equality," and when preferences are measured against a developing standard of justice. Maintaining that balance, Kloppenberg suggests, is the perpetual challenge of democracies, as daunting and inspiring now as it has always been. Now, I want to linger a bit longer, though, on the contradiction in Lincoln, because those contradictions, it seems to me, take us to the heart of a central claim that I want to put forward tonight. Indeed, like Lincoln, I believe the evil of slavery deformed American democracy. But I want to insist, in addition, that white racism deforms and distorts the characters of those who embrace it, blocking the way for the development of the kinds of people democracy actually requires. Y'all didn't hear me. The problem then isn't us. The problem is white folks. See, I'm in Mississippi, I don't care. Let me make the point I'm making. See, y'all, some of you students, some of y'all walk with me. On April 14th, 1876, at the unveiling of the Freedmen's Monument in Lincoln Park, Washington, D.C., Frederick Douglass delivered his oration in memory of Abraham Lincoln. I was struck by a particular passage. Let me read it to you. Quote, "It must be admitted, truth compels me to admit, even here in the presence of the monument erected in Lincoln's memory, Abraham Lincoln was not in the fullest sense of the word either our man or our model. In his interest, in his associations, in his habits of thought, and in his prejudices, he was a white man." This is Frederick Douglass. He was preeminently the white man's president, entirely devoted to the welfare of white men. First and last, you and yours were the objects of his deepest affection and his most earnest solicitude. You are the children of Abraham Lincoln. We are at best his stepchildren. Children by adoption, children by forces of circumstances and necessity. I think James Baldwin will pick up on this theme, Dr. Stamps, in his description of black people as Abraham's rejected son. Douglass acknowledges the exalted place of Lincoln in the history of the nation, but makes explicit the limits of his character. That Lincoln's commitment to the belief that white people matter more than others distorted his moral vision and blocked the way to the attainment of the kinds of excellences his ideal of democracy required. This belief that white people matter more, what I call in my book, in Democracy in Black, what I call the value gap, rests at the heart of this nation and confounds us at every turn. James Baldwin once wrote, "America sometimes resembles an exceedingly monotonous minstrel show. The same dances, the same music, the same jokes. One has done or been the show so long that one can do it in one's sleep." End quote. So here in 1876, Frederick Douglass exposed the insidious work of the value gap, and here we are in 2017. And we continue to confront how the value gap deforms our characters and our democracy. That was just my introduction. Now, one way of reading the Black freedom tradition and its latest instantiation in the movement of Black Lives, or the Black Lives Matter movement, is as an attempt to close the value gap, to expose the way it limits our capacity for generosity, our sense of humility, our idea of benevolence and mutuality, and how it limits our ideas, our ideals of justice, the democratic virtues. John Dewey wrote, he's my favorite philosopher, as moral persons, we wish the fullest life possible to ourselves and to others. And the fullest life means largely a complete and free development of capacities in knowledge and production of beauty and use. Our interest in others, then, is not satisfied, Dewey writes, as long as their intelligence is cramped, their appreciation of truth feeble, their emotions hard and incomprehensive, their powers of production compressed. To will their good is to will the freeing of all such gifts to the highest degree, end quote. We know what we know about this country's history and about the present state of the nation is that this wish has rarely been extended to all Black folk. And when it has been extended to us, it has been immediately arrested by a reassertion that white people matter more. Now, Black Lives Matter emerged as a heartfelt rallying cry in the aftermath of Trayvon Martin's death and the acquittal of George Zimmerman in 2002. President Hogan, I don't know why y'all invited me up here, I'm gonna tell the truth. Alicia Garza and Patrice Colors and Oprah Tometi came up with the hashtag to express their outrage and to forcefully assert, especially given the contrary evidence, that Black people matter. The organization put it this way, quote, Black Lives Matter is working for a world where Black lives are no longer systematically and intentionally targeted for demise. We affirm our contributions to this society, our humanity, our resilience in the face of deadly oppression. We have put our sweat equity and love for Black people into creating a political project, taking the hashtag off of social media and into the streets. The call for Black lives to matter is a rallying cry for all Black lives striving for Black liberation. Black Lives Matter, then, works on a number of registers. It is a mobilizing, organizing tool in this particular moment. It is also a form of political critique and an evocative imagining of the political. To think of the hashtag only as an assertion of the value of Black lives limits its aim and purposes. Even in the previous description, Garcia, Colors, and Tometi affirm our contributions to society, our humanity, and our resilience in the face of deadly oppression. They aren't arguing for Black humanity. And beyond their specific purposes, when we see Black people in the streets chanting Black Lives Matter, the slogan works in the context of political action like an incantation that challenges not only forms of policing that terrorize our communities, but also indicts current social and political and economic arrangements that cut short the life chances of Black people. Practices and arrangements that lead to premature death. This isn't about asserting the value of Black life. That is already known. The price of that ticket has been paid. Right? Black Lives Matter isn't an assertion that we matter. Black Lives Matter is an assertion that white lives don't matter more. So Black Lives Matter registers, I'm saying this in Mississippi, ooh. Black Lives register the unseemly belief, and it's a belief baked into the DNA of the country, that white lives are valued more than others. And this is at the heart of white supremacy. White supremacy is more than bad people in hooded robes, burning crosses and screaming the word nigger. I said it from the pulpit, we can't be scared of it. These people are easily condemnable. Those are the bad people over there. White supremacy involves the way a society organizes itself and what and whom it chooses to value. It determines where you live, which schools you attend, and what jobs are available to you, and reminds you daily of your status and station in life. And to my mind, this is what white supremacy is in a nutshell, a set of practices informed by the fundamental belief that white people are valued more than others. This is the value gap. And it's not about loud racists. I grew up in Moss Point, Mississippi, and the town is kind of divided between the east side and the west side. And my dad decided that he had some precocious kids, so he was going to move us from the east side of town to the west side of town. So he moved us onto the hill in Briarwood. Those from Moss Point know what I'm talking about, right? And so he's this postman. You know, that's high cotton back in the day, delivering mail, right? And my mother was cleaning toilets at Ingalls Shipyard, and look who they produced. And so he bought the house, and as he was moving into the house, the police drove by and was slow, and my dad jangled the keys and said, yeah, I own it, it's mine. Right? And as we were moving in the house, I was playing with my Tonka truck, those old Tonka trucks. You remember those Tonka trucks? And I'm making the Tonka truck noise, right? And all of a sudden, I hear in the background, stop playing with that nigga. And I looked my new friend in the face, and I grabbed my truck, and I ran inside. And I told Eddie Glaude Sr. what happened. I don't know if there was a for sale sign up a couple of weeks later. I don't know what he did. But that's how we usually tell the story of American racism, right? Some child gets wounded by some mean-spirited adult. And then that child has to spend the rest of his or her life proving that she's not that. But that's too easy. Because when we moved from the east side of Moss Point to the west side of Moss Point, I already knew something was different, because on Rose Drive, when it rained, Rose Drive flooded because the pipes weren't that good. The schools weren't as good. The houses weren't as big. The sidewalks weren't paved. There was something in the spatial environment that reproduced the value gap. Getting called the N-word was just the icing on the cake. You feeling me? In no way do we live in a society like apartheid South Africa. That would be an example at the extreme. But we do live in a country where black people confront every day the damning reality that we are less valued. It is experienced in the very built environment of this nation, in our neighborhoods, where we go to school, and the places we work. The data is crystal clear. African Americans suffer chronic double-digit unemployment. We lead the nation in rates of heart disease and HIV/AIDS. African Americans make up nearly 1 million of the 2.4 million Americans in prison. When we think about the differences between whites and blacks in high school graduation rates, among those with college degrees, mortality rates, and access to health care and levels of wealth, differences in salaries with the same level of education, in the percentage of children in poverty, we can see, independent of individual acts of racism, white Americans, particularly those with money, matter more than others. We ought to understand Black Lives Matter as a rejection of this belief. More to the point, it rejects the belief that white lives are presumed more valuable than black lives, because it is that belief, the view that animates so much of the mess that undermines this democratic country, which limits our ability to reach for higher excellences. I use the language of excellences purposefully here. I want to think about Black Lives Matter in the tradition of what I call black democratic perfectionism. That is a radical cultivation of democratic individuality in the service of racial justice. Y'all all right? I just want to check on you. I don't want to take too much of your time. Yeah. Within the Black Lives Matter movement, we find an insistence on the expansiveness of black life. At the forefront of the protest are black members of the LGBTQI community, the working poor, black poor, and others challenging the state, as well as narrow conceptions of black political leadership and action, all in the name of a robust form of black individuality. And I don't mean some facile bourgeois idea of individualism where you can get paid and get you a nice car and wear a nice suit. My motto for this view is James Baldwin, this little short gay black man. In his essay, The Uses of the Blues, Dr. Stamps, Baldwin clearly states what he takes to be the Negro problem. Listen at this. I'm from Mississippi. This resonates. Quote, I'm talking about what happens to you if you have barely escaped suicide or death or madness or yourself. You watch your children growing up, and no matter what you do, you're powerless. You're really powerless against the forces of the world that is out to tell your child that he has no right to be alive. And no amount of liberal jargon and no amount of talk about how well and how far we have progressed does anything to soften or to point out any solution to this dilemma. In every generation, ever since Negroes have been brought here, Every Negro mother and child, Baldwin writes, every Negro mother and father has had to face that child and try to create in that child some way of surviving this particular world, some way to make the child who will be despised not despise himself. I don't know what the Negro problem is, Baldwin writes. I don't know what the Negro problem means to white people, Baldwin writes, but this is what it means to Negroes. I tell this story every time I travel around the country. I was elected the president of the American Academy of Religion, the largest association of scholars of religion in the world. And here I'm a country boy from Moss Point, Mississippi. And I got the call and I was so excited, and then my baby called me. He's not a baby no more. He's 6'2", wears a size 13. He leaves those shoes around the house. They're not shoes when they're that big. They're obstacles. They're obstacles. But I get the call about the presidency of the AAR. And an hour later, I get a call from my baby, who's a senior at Brown. And I hear it in his voice. I say, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" And he says, "I was doing an assignment for my urban ethnography class in the local park in Providence. And as I was sitting on the bench, a police cruiser drove by. And it stopped and then made a U-turn and then drove up on the sidewalk. And the police officer came out and he asked me, 'Who are you and why are you here?' And I told him I'm a Brown student and I'm here doing an assignment. And then the officer says, 'Yes, but the park closes at 9:30. And my son said, "Yes, sir, but it's only 6:30. And then as he said that, the officer's partner came around and had his hand on his weapon. And they both leaned in and told him the park closes at 9:30. And he put his hands in the air. And he tapped his girlfriend and said, "We don't want any trouble," and he left. So today I get the call that I'm the president of the largest association of scholars in the world. I get a call from my baby that his body was in the wrong place. And if he had a bad day that day, if he didn't quite feel like being bothered that day, he wouldn't have came home. I would have lost him. No white family has to go through that. No white family has to worry about their child coming home. Here I am living a bourgeois life in New Jersey. The police are bringing home my son's friend down the street because he got caught smoking weed. I have to call him downstairs. He's in his pajamas looking like the suburban white kid that he is or was, right? And he comes downstairs. I said, "Come here." Sounded like my daddy. "Let me show you something." And I point down the street and I said, "You see they brought such and such home." He said, "What did he do?" I said, "I don't know, but I want you to know they wouldn't have brought you home to me." Whatever the Negro problem is, Jimmy said, how do we keep that from taking root in the soul of our children? How do we give them the resources to imagine themselves as expansive human beings, capable of transforming the world? Tougaloo knows something about this. Here, Baldwin in this moment foregrounds, I'm going to bring it home, foregrounds the idea of the value gap that I put forward earlier, that the fact of growing up, of coming of age in a place that denies you standing, distorts one's sense of self and disfigures one's character. It arrests one's capacities, and in that light, it is with great effort and risk that one takes up the task of self-creation in this world. Listen. I'm going to leave the text alone. Is that all right?
Oh, man.
The value gap distorts our character and deforms American democracy. It blocks the way to people becoming the kinds of persons that democracy requires. Because these folk will throw away the principles of democracy in defense of the belief that white people matter more. We see this in the age of Trump. It is the heart of the Trump rebellion. It's at the heart of the Tea Party rebellion. At every moment of progress, at every moment of advance, the revolution, articulation of principles of liberty, freedom, and equality is reconciled with slavery, the value gap. Reconstruction, radical reconstruction. What? We're going to have a multiracial democracy. What do we get in response? We get convict leasing, another form of slavery. We get Jim and Jane Crow. We get the freedom movement of the mid-20th century. What do we get in response? We get the tax revolt in Northern California and calls for law and order. We get the election of our first black president in 2008. What do we get in response? We get the Tea Party, and we get a wholesale attack on voting rights all across the country. Wow. All culminating in Donald Trump's election. The value gap distorting American democracy, distorting the character of those who claim to be democratic, whether they're on the right or on the left. Now, our challenge is, how do we be in the midst of that? How can we create a sense of self in the midst of that? How do we muster the resources to imagine ourselves in the grandest possible terms such that we can step into the world and transform it? There's a line Jimmy Baldwin says. He wrote, it's so powerful. He says, when the black man and woman, I added and woman, step outside the bounds of the world's expectations of us, when we decide to act according to our own vision, we're talking revolution. You see? You see? So here we are in this moment, this age of insecurity, economic insecurity, demographic insecurity. You know what I mean? Economic insecurity, wages have flatlined. People are working harder for less. They think they can't bequeath to their children a better future. That's cutting across race. Demographic insecurity. For the first time in the history of U.S. presidential elections, a president was elected without the majority of white people voting for him. 2008 scared the hell out of America. For the first time since we've been taking the data, there were more black and brown babies born in this country than there were white babies. The demographic shift has happened. It's not happening. It has already happened. And then you combine that economic insecurity and that demographic insecurity with Trump's insecurities, and what you get. You get what we are now. So the question for us in this moment is, how will we stand? How will we exhibit the virtues? Right? How will we exhibit the excellences required for us to imagine a different future? Jimmy Baldwin insisted that we must embrace a robust conception of what it means to be a black man and woman. To step into the beauty and power of what that sound coming out of Mr. Bennett's mouth was. To take the lessons, of our journey and let it shape and inform us, to understand that it's not about us, it's about them. I'm tired of dancing. Hold up. Some of y'all got to raise money to keep the school going. I don't have to do that. I have tenure. I'm tired of sweet talking them.
Yes, sir.
There's a line from Malcolm. I'm getting carried away, and I know I'm on tape, but there's a line from Malcolm X. He says, stop sweet talking. You've been sweet talking them ever since they brought you here. Tell them what kind of hell you've been catching. Let them know that if they're not ready to clean up their house, they shouldn't have a house. It should catch on fire and burn down. Now, I'm not trying to burn down anybody's crib, but you get the point. The point is that we have to stop dancing. We have to stop conforming. We have to stop trying to make people feel comfortable around us. We have to stop being worried about white fear. We have to stop making ourselves small and being complicit with this. Oh, I'm angry. I'm rageful. I'm bright. I'm brilliant. I'm my mama's child, and you are going to have to deal with me. The challenge for Tougaloo and all of you brilliant folk who come out of here, how will you leave your footprint on this world? How will you resist the effort to make you small? How will you step into the grandness of what God has called you to be? This moment rests on you. Will you develop a self? Will you create a way of being in the world that is so expansive, so large, that anyone can inhabit it? the grandness of our tradition, is that justice is not just for us. The grandest of our tradition is that we have been sacrificing with our blood, sweat, and tears for a more just world. Baldwin taught me that. More importantly, Moss Point, Mississippi taught me that. Thank you so much.
If you'll turn to your neighbor and say these words: social justice in the 21st century. Myth or reality? And of course, what we just heard were a lot of realities coming from Dr. Eddie S. Glaude Jr. So let's give him another round of applause. And of course, what you all heard this evening is that Dr. Glaude really stressed the value gap that exists in this country, and it said that it distorts the character of American democracy, and it's our responsibility to help close that gap. Now, we've come to another important point in this program this evening, so we can engage you all in an interactive and meaningful dialogue with Dr. Glaude. So, of course, at this time, you know, we have many questions. And of course, we will try to get to every question that is asked here this evening. But so there is structure for the questions, I'm going to put these rules in place, or these guidelines. There are hosts that are situated in various areas of the chapel this evening, Ms. Henry and others. There are 3 positioned throughout the chapel. And of course, they have microphones. And then we're going to ask that you please raise your hands to be acknowledged before posing your questions to Dr. Glaude. And also keep in mind that the program this evening is being live streamed, so if you choose, you may also introduce yourself and also your affiliation. So we want to hear your questions, and I'm sure that Dr. Glaude is ready and willing to answer them. So let us begin. So if you have questions, please raise your hands at this time.
Let's go.
Ms. Simmons.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
My name is Catherine Simmons. I'm a sophomore political science major from Hattiesburg, Mississippi. I'm also the secretary officer of the Reuben V. Anderson Pre-Law Society. And my question for you is, the African American Church has been a cornerstone of community since its inception, meeting the spiritual, social, and political needs of the community. Does the church still have a voice in 21st century social justice work? Does it have a pertinence to the Tougaloo College community and progressive ideas, or has it retreated to a position of silence with all the gains that have been made since the civil rights era?
See, I'm at Tougaloo. Let me say this. I think one of the first things we have to do is tell ourselves a better story. And oftentimes we tell a story of black churches as if they have always been on the front lines of the black freedom struggle. And I'm gonna just say this, Pastor. The prophetic is always in the minor key. So the prophetic is always in the minor key. So if you think about all the churches, there's a reason why Dr. King and others formed the Progressive Baptist Convention, Progressive National Baptist Convention. It's because the National Baptist Convention did not support, with John Jackson and all those others, did not support what they were doing. You know, you have all these folk talking about, well, Dr. King spoke in my church and I was there with check the record, right? There's a small percentage of churches that actually took that risk. So we need to tell a better story of the church. In fact, in Du Bois's Souls of Black Folk and Of the Faith of the Fathers in 1903, Du Bois writes, our churches are differentiating. some into business, entertainment institutions, others, right? This is 1903. So, you have to ask the question, who really won, Dr. King or Father Divine or Daddy Grace or Reverend Ike? So that's the first thing. So I think what we do know is that there are progressive churches out there. They don't have the platform that many of the mega churches have. Many of these churches are embracing what I like to call a big box strategy, like Walmart and Sam's Club, right? They're trying to move out into the suburbs, get this big campus, have their, be on TBN and all that stuff, right? So I think churches play a role because they are resource institutions. They are ours. They're mobilizing spaces, right? And if you have progressive folks in the pews, listen, folks who are progressive and not fans. We have too many fans in pews today, right? Then these institutions can become much more active, much more active. One of the interesting things about Black Lives Matter is that, remember, a year after Ferguson popped off, there was an action on Easter Sunday where they were actually challenging churches in their communities to do more, and some of those churches called the police on them, right? So the short answer, there's no one-to-one relationship between black churches and progressive politics, right? That's the first thing. So we need to tell ourselves a better story. Two, folks who are in churches need to demand that those pastors and their churches be more actively engaged. And if the church isn't actively engaged, find yourself a new church.
Other questions? Ms. Johnson.
I'll make my answer shorter, I promise, so we can get more and more in it, because I want to hear.
Ms. Johnson on the front row.
Good evening, Dr. Glaude. My name is Reagan Johnson. I'm a junior history major from Gulfport, Mississippi. I'm a fellow 228 member, yes.
Yes, indeed.
And I serve as the 2017-2018 Student Government Association Vice President. My question for you this evening is, your book, Democracy in Black, has been hailed as a landmark book on race in America. You have a chapter that discusses the value gap and the many manifestations of how black lives are devalued in this country. You also point out that the United States remains a nation fundamentally shaped by its racist past and present. Do you feel that there is any chance that the future of race relations in this country can be changed for the better?
I think so. I have to bank my all on it. Otherwise, I'm going to be in my liquor cabinet too much. I have to bank my all on it. This is the difference between myself and Ta-Nehisi Coates. So when you read Coates, right, there's a sense in which a deep-seated pessimism has taken root. White supremacy almost functions like oxygen. It's very difficult to imagine challenging it. He actually uses natural metaphors. In the latest book, it's like the flood, right? So there are these metaphors that he uses to describe it, which almost makes it difficult to imagine our resisting it. And see, I come from a place where making do was never the goal. It's never the end, right? Making do, right? Y'all know what I mean. I have to translate it someplace else, right? But making do was never the goal. It was always the condition for the possibility of flourishing. It was never the end. It was always a means towards something. So for me, I have to be able to hope because I have faith in us. I have faith in our capacity to transform our world, right? At the end of the day, we created it. We're going to have to undo it and recreate it, right? And that means, but I think we have to be honest with ourselves. Until we're honest, I just said this on public radio, until we're honest about what the stars and bars mean, honest about what the blood in Mississippi's soil actually represents, honest about why black unemployment is twice that of white unemployment. It's not because we don't want to work, it's because of racism in the labor market. We need to understand why the wealth gap is what it is. It's not because black folk haven't worked hard, it's because what? We come out of a dual housing market. We could tell a story about why, right, we are where we are. But people want to sit in willful ignorance, right? They want to sit in willful ignorance. And one of the most exhausting things about being black in this country, and I'm at Princeton and I have to do it every day, is that we have to convince people that the hell that we're catching is actually true. in certain philosophical circles, somebody will say some people have credibility excess and some people have credibility deficits, right? So you can say that I feel discriminated against as a white person and people believe you immediately, right? That's what the data is suggesting. We say we've been discriminated against, you, that you crying victim, right? So part of the answer is that we have to honestly confront our past and present. And until we do that, we will stay on this racial hamster wheel, right? We will stay on this racial hamster wheel. But I got to have a fundamental belief and faith, all right? Because you know what faith is, right? Faith in what? Substance? Hope for and what? Of not? I come straight out of where I come from. So yes, that wasn't a short answer, but I'm trying to get better. Does that help? Yes, Doc. I'm sorry.
You will please stand.
And y'all got to challenge me now. Just don't let me sit up here and run my mouth.
Good evening.
Good
My
evening,
name
Doc.
is Antoine Matthews, and I'm a senior biology major with an emphasis in chemistry here at Tougaloo College. I'm also the founder of Peer Health Educators, or student-led organizations to redefine the philosophy of health. So I kind of have a question, statement, liberation as well, maybe. So here goes. Is social justice a social construct that could potentially derail the movement of one's ability to mobilize a possible solution? I would consider the notion social justice as a term that many rather focus on the discourse of justice instead of the implications of establishing foundations for communities of color. There's this notion that we should be accepted or wait until our white counterparts establish a plan for our destiny, but isn't our destiny ours? Therefore, this time of social justice is not a question of what's next. The question we should pose, are we ready to take back our destiny and keep it this time? Let's no longer consider ourselves a rejection, but a reflection of determination. The Black diaspora created a sense of ownership for my Black. History of our people paved the way for my Black. If you ask me, Black people are social justice to fight for our Black.
Well, I appreciate that, Doc. I really do, because remember the claim I made, that the value gap is a reflection, not of us, but of, and let me be very clear, I know some people who happen to be white that I love deeply. I want to be very clear. You notice the formulation. I know some people who happen to be white that I love dearly. It's very different than people who are invested in being white. There's a distinction that we need to think about, I think, in this regard. So the problem, and this comes out of my reading of James Baldwin, which actually informs Toni Morrison and others, right? Until the nation answers the question, why did it need the nigger in the first place? We can't get out of this. Right? I'm not that. I was born in a world that consigned me to it. And I have to figure out how to raise my child in a world that wants to consign him to it and all of its negative effects. But I'm not that. That's on you. Right? So part of the work is to figure out, why do you need the nigger? Why do you need the Muslim? Why do you need the scapegoat in these moments, right? So that's one axis of the argument. The other axis of the argument is that in the midst of that catastrophe, right, in the midst of that transformational wounding, to echo Hortense Spillers, we have engaged in the extraordinary work of self-creation, of creating selves that have produced beautiful lives, right? And it's in that space that I'm trying to figure out philosophical resources for a certain kind of politics that I'm calling Black democratic perfectionism. Right? So one of the ways in which we respond is the co-op movement in Jackson. One of the ways we respond, right, is what's happening in North Carolina with the Forward Together movement with Reverend Barber. One of the ways we respond is the Black Lives Matter movement, which is very different. It's differentiating. It's not DeRay in a blue vest, right? It's folk who are calling, right, for a fundamental redistribution of wealth, challenging the very pillars of capitalism, which presumes that they're disposable people, right? But the point is that we can't just simply flip the coin to say that we need to just retreat into our spaces and take care of us, right? Because that impacts us. it actually impacts the life chances of our children. So I think it's both and. You see? That what I'm calling for is precisely a kind of democratic politics, right? That takes the best of the black tradition. And remember what justice is. Justice is just a shorthand for standing in right relation with our fellows. And what is right relation? That you see me for who I am and I see you for who you are. That ain't black and white, right? That's recognizing the fundamental dignity of me as if you're in religious terms, as a child of God, right? And to build structures to affirm that, to build a way of life to enable you to be, not only to dream, but to make those dreams a reality, right? One of the things we can't do is fall for the okie doke. The frame is the problem. You see? The frame is the problem. You know, I cut my teeth in the black nationalist tradition, right? And one of the things I realized is that I was caught. It's like in philosophy, if you're a relativist, you believe, you know, it's just the flip side of absolutism. You're caught, right? But anyway, I get it, I'm getting, all right.
Other questions? Okay, let's go to this side and then we'll come back to students on this side.
We got this left, kind of right focus over here, we gotta go over here.
Dr. Holmes, Charles Holmes.
I am having a ball.
Holmes, Charles Holmes, retired,
Dr.
unretired, and fighting like Frederick Douglass.
Fighting like Frederick Douglass. I heard that.
I attended PS 24, you know, what Ball attended. And it said that he read probably every book in the Harlem Library. Yeah. But my point is this. We know that in the near future, the Schomburg collection have all unpublished letters. What do you think you might get from those letters, and when is your book that I'm looking forward to reading will come out?
Oh, only the Lord knows.
Okay.
I'm working hard on it. One of the things that I'm trying to do, I have a new book. I just signed a contract with Crown entitled James Baldwin's America, 1963 to 1972. And I'm trying to figure out what happens to Jimmy's voice between the publication of Fire Next Time and the publication of No Name in the Street. And I'm using Baldwin's journey and his wisdom and his witness as a way to account for what happens in the country between 63 and 72. You go from the March on Washington to the dawn of Watergate and Vietnam, right? So there's a moment of possibility and a moment of profound disillusionment. So what I'm trying to do is to work through his correspondences, to look at the letters to his brother David, to look at his exchanges. There's this extraordinary letter in the Schomburg that Hugh Downs, you remember Hugh Downs from 2020? Hugh Downs writes Baldwin in 64, I think, or 65, 64. And just, you know, it's like liberal guilt. I'm complicit. And Baldwin writes this amazing response. It's like a 4-page letter or 3-page letter. And it's almost, the quality of the writing is almost as good as anything that we've read in public, that's been published, where he's grappling with his own anxiety about being an artist and bearing witness in this moment. This challenge of his charge to kind of create what's in his head and to speak to the hell that black people are catching. So I want to tell this very thick story because I think it has something to offer us as we've gone from the highs of the Obama era to the lows of the Trump era. The high of the Black Lives Matter movement to now black identity extremist. You know, the FBI and black identity extremists. So I think Baldwin has something to teach us. So when I come home in November, when I go to New Jersey in November after the AAR conference, I'm going to be in the Schomburg working through those letters, and I have someone right now working through his letters at Yale in Beinecke. I hope I could tell a thick story. I hope I could treat him right.
Okay, we have some more questions from students. Yes, sir, in the glasses, Ms. Henry.
It's so, y'all are something else. It's just
Hello, my name is Benjamin Parker. I'm from Hattiesburg, Mississippi. I would like to know, what are your views on black capitalists and what role do you believe they should play in the advancement of the American Negro?
My views on black capitalism or black capitalist? Okay. I am, by definition, an intuitive socialist. by definition, I intuit socialism. That means I'm not a systematic thinker. I haven't worked through Marx's Das Kapital, right? I intuit because I reject the fundamental premise of capitalism. And what is the fundamental premise? That they're disposable people. I just reject it out of hand. And I think that the whole idea of surplus value, right, actually leads us to a situation where not only are people disposable, but where we do severe damage to the planet, right? So everything is instrumentalized. Now, that's not to say that I don't believe in markets, right? That I don't believe in markets, that markets can actually improve the condition of folks' lives. So I'm not red, I'm kind of pink in my politics, you see? What I would prefer to do is to avoid isms altogether. Right? I think ism mongering gets us in trouble. Because, it's like trying to read Frederick Douglass, Dr. Holmes. You read Frederick Douglass in the early part of his life, and you think, oh my God, Frederick Douglass has a fundamental belief in liberty. Da, da, da. You read Frederick Douglass in the 1850s, oh my God, Frederick Douglass is a nationalist, he's a separatist. You read Frederick Douglass when he's ambassador to Haiti, oh my God, Frederick Douglass has sold us out to the nation, to the national empire, right? In other words, human beings are complex. And they're complex in relation to the problems we confront. And so if you and so I take it because you got your suspenders on, you're looking nice, you're looking crisp. But if you and I got a conception of justice that's aligned, you could be a black capitalist, I could be a black socialist, but we could work together, Doc. That's what I'm thinking. That's what I'm thinking.
We have time for a few more questions. Yes, sir. 2 more students, one in the center, and then Ms. Snell.
How you doing? I'm Lavelle Williams. I'm a mass communications major at Tugu College, and I have a question.
Sure.
I decided to take you up on challenging you.
Thank you, Doc.
The topic has been a lot about black people and white people, but what would you say to the rising group of young people who are legit, like genuinely mixed, and they don't? Often I've found young people have actually identity issues. Where do they fall in supporting black issues? And when you say the problem is the white person, well, that's a whole half of that child. Where do you think that they should stand? How should they approach the issue of social inequality?
Right. So one of the ways in which this is a great question. I mean, one of the ways in which I've been making the argument, and it got kind of loose because I just got the spirit. Is that the whiteness is not necessarily associated with bodies, right? Whiteness is an ideology, right? And I think how that ideology works and how it organizes the distribution of benefits and burdens is what we need to challenge. So I happen to know a lot of people that I love, that I'm willing to die for, who are white, who happen to be white. But I want to challenge, and this comes out of, I want to challenge those who identify themselves as white people. And they're not just simply Richard Spencer, right? There are other sorts of folks who make that move. So, and I would want to say that the idea of mixed race plays in an interesting sort of way on the dyad of black and white. And mixed race is in some ways oftentimes an attempt, not just simply to acknowledge, right, one's mixed ancestry. It's actually trying to distance oneself from the burden of blackness, right? I'm not that, I'm this. And in some ways that distancing has always been a part of processes of racialization in the United States, right? So Irish were once, right, the quote-unquote N-words of Europe. They come over here. What do? They try to establish their relation, their proximity to blackness. Blackness is at the bottom. So the relative distance with relation to blackness defines one's relative inclusion or exclusion in the body politic and society, right? So oftentimes invocations of mixed identity, right, it's really playing fast and loose with the way in which the black-white dyad functions in the United States that we need to be worried about, that we need to kind of, be willing to critique at that moment. But I would say that whiteness as an ideology, right, isn't necessarily tethered to white bodies. I know a whole bunch of black people. So not only do I know a whole bunch of black people, right? I mean, this is hard. You can't come out of this thing and not be messed up. Right? We can't come out of this sojourn and not have messed up ideas of what's beautiful. messed up ideas of what's valuable, right? Right? And I know a whole lot of black people who will pimp in the name of blackness in order to gain access to that. Wow. Right? So part of the challenge, I think, is for us to mobilize our resources to critique, intellectual resources, to critique how whiteness distorts our characters and deform democracy. And that, of course, comes along with a fundamental commitment to justice. And let me be clear. People will say to us, you're getting derailed with these identity issues. That's a red herring. To say that black people should be treated equally under the law is not identity politics. That's a justice question. To say that women should be paid equally to men, that's not identity politics. That's a justice question. Right? So they want to say that you're involved in all of this identity stuff. No. That's just a way to get you from challenging, right, white patriarchal norms that's distributing the benefits and burdens unequally across the body politic. Right? So that's my long-winded answer. That help?
So we have a question from Ms. Snell, then Ms. Reed, and then Attorney Howard over here, and then two more questions after that, and I'm looking in this direction because all the hands are over here.
Okay, good evening. I am Sheridan Snell, a senior sociology major, pre-law minor here at Tougaloo College, and I also serve as the president of the Reuben V. Anderson Pre-Law Society. So I kind of have a two-part question. How can young people better engage in social justice movements of the 21st century, and how can we encourage others of our generation to understand the sense of urgency when it comes to those issues that affect our communities?
Well, I think, by being who you are right now. I mean, so that's kind of cliche-ish, but let me just say this: there are problems right in front of you. Right? Oftentimes, what happens is that we try to imagine, right, engaging in politics in idealized terms. Right? We want to be a part of a movement that looks like the '60s, as we've imagined it. Not understanding that there are particular problems right here in Jackson that we ought to orient ourselves towards, right? That we ought to locate. So, Miss Ella Baker, who's my hero, my shero, it's her idea of politics that drives everything that I do, right? She says, we don't need leaders, right? If we're the leaders we've been looking for, right? We don't need the charismatic figure to guide us, right? We need to organize everyday ordinary people. Right? So if we understand that there are particular issues that drive us right now, right? A living wage. What does it mean for me I want folks who are working at McDonald's not to have to work, 40, 60 hours a week and still can't pay their rent. Right? I want them to be able to, you can't be working, 40 hours a week and you have to make a choice between keeping a roof over your head and putting food on the table. That makes no sense to me. Right? So Fight for 15, where are they? I'm going to align with them, and I'm going to organize with them. Or there's policing issues here, right? So you see in Philadelphia, they just elected a DA that is almost a prison abolitionist. So folks, Color Change has started a super PAC designed to attack those district attorneys who are not prosecuting police officers who are abusing our people, right? How do I mobilize? How do I connect with them? Because policing is my issue. Maybe I'm thinking about reentry, right? Folks who are coming out of the Bing, right, after doing a bid. How do I organize? Where do I? So in other words, there's something right here, right in front of you for you to get involved. Not in some major, massive way where we got to sing We Shall Overcome or something, right? Organize. In other words, find the community, find the organization right here on the ground. If it's the youth wing of the NAACP and they kind of acting funny, go in there and take it over. Right? Find the organization that aligns with your politics and do what you need to do. The second thing, to your second question, you don't need everybody. Oftentimes, I hear this all the time we used to do this when we were at Morehouse. Man, I wish more people would just get active. We're doing all of this work and y'all just out here going to the Freaknik. My chief of staff actually started the Freaknik, the DC Metro Club at Morehouse. Of dating myself, right? I wish everybody would get more involved. And then it turns out that's all we needed was 10 brothers. And we turned Morehouse out. That's why they tried to throw us out of school. 10 brothers. We took over assembly. I'm not trying to tell y'all to do that, President Hogan. We took over assembly. We demanded X, Y, and Z. You know who those Chin brothers are? I could just name a couple of them. One is he runs the whole entire School of Liberal Arts for Penn State. The other is Ron Sullivan. He teaches Harvard. He wrote the brief for Gina 6. Right? I'm just talking about these, just 10 of us. You don't, where the two or more gather, right? So you don't have to convince the entire community to be a transformative agent, right? And sometimes when the momentum happens, right, you drop that seed, right? And then somebody will pick it up, right? You drop that seed. The third thing I would say really quickly is create the conditions under which you're constantly growing. And that means you got to keep reading. You got to keep reading. You just can't, my experience tells me, no. You got to know the tradition that's the wind beneath your wings. You got to know so when people say this ain't your mama's civil rights movement, like you don't even know what your mama's civil rights movement was. If you really understood it, you would see its complexities, its nuances, right? So in other words, if you're going to be engaged in this struggle, if you're going to try to be an example of others, right? Engage in that lifelong journey of understanding the tradition that makes you possible.
Dr. Glaude, we have Miss Reed, Kiara Reed.
Okay. I'm Kiara Reed, a senior biology major from Chicago, Illinois, and I serve as the SGA president for this school year. So from a current SGA president to a former SGA president, I want to know what your stance is on HBCU involvement in social justice. So I know our relevance has been questioned, and as of last year, the formation of the HBCU consortium was put into place to give us more of a forefront in political issues. So how do you think that HBCUs as a whole can stand more in the gap in involvement with social justice, as well as some HBCUs, some of my friends who are also HBCU presidents, they're being attacked with the issue of coming together with PWIs. And in a lot of instances, when they come together, the idea of saying that their school is an HBCU is taken completely out of the question. And for those who don't know, HBCU stands for Historically Black Colleges and Universities. So that's being... PWI is predominantly white institution. Thank you. That's being completely taken out of the paperwork. So it's as if it never existed. So how do you feel that we can be more progressive in making sure that we're around and that our presence is felt?
That's a wonderful question. That's a wonderful question. It's a great question. So the first thing is that we do know, given what's happening at PWIs, we're seeing the admissions numbers at HBCUs beginning to rise. Right? So more and more African-American students and African-descended people beginning to choose to go to HBCUs. Right, that's the first thing. The second thing I think is we need to dispel this idea that HBCUs aren't the real world. Right? Negro, please. Right? And so oftentimes when we go into these spaces, the first thing we encounter is the claim that you're living in this ideal environment. That's not the real world. We live in the real world, right? And then you have to say, well, you know, most American spaces outside of work are highly segregated. Right? So what are you describing as the real world is not quite true. And B, I don't have to sit and encounter all the things you encounter. I can actually go to class and learn without having to justify my presence at Princeton as an affirmative action behavior, right? And I'm actually learning, I mean, one of the things, I just said this to Dr. Stamps, one of the things I learned at Morehouse is that I'm supposed to be wherever I am. There's a kind of confidence in the way in which I navigate the world that comes out of this HBCU experience and affirmation of who I am. So that's just the kind of broader, the general kind of art. The way in which HBCUs can get involved is that the students themselves must be involved. HBCUs are, to my mind, simply they're just simply, it's a category that describes the students who attend them, right? So how are HBCUs to move into a more social activist move? It's through the students. When the Tougaloo 9 did what y'all did, it wasn't like Tougaloo, the university said, go do what y'all did. No, y'all did it. Tougaloo then made a decision as an institution. It probably was complex. Am I right, Brother Brad? As an institution, you think about what the students at Fisk did, what the students at A&T did, right? The students drive the institution, right? That's how it gets, so the students drive. The second thing is this: black institutional life is collapsing all around us. Right? This is really one of the crises of our moment. Black institutional life is collapsing. So we lost black newspapers a long time ago. Although they're still around, they're not quite what they were. Remember what the Chicago Defender used to be, the Pittsburgh Courier? Black Twitter is taking that role now. Black Twitter's doing that function now, right? But black banks, black insurance companies, black theater and arts organizations, they're collapsing. One of the few institutions we have is the church and HBCUs. And so we have to figure out how to shore up this institution, because these were the institutions that protected us against the headwinds of the value gap. So Dick Gregory was fond of saying, I learned how to public speak in my church. I learned how to be at Morehouse so that I could step out, right, and fight Joe Scarborough, right? I got my armor here. So if these institutions collapse, where do you get trained to be the warriors? So, the short answer, I keep doing this. Short answer, you make the institutions politically relevant. And then we must secure these institutions financially and hold some of these autocratic presidents. I'm not talking about you, President Hogan. Some of these autocratic presidents who run these institutions, right, like it's their own house, right, who don't have the vision to imagine a Tougaloo or a Morehouse or a Spelman or a Howard or a Tuskegee, to imagine these institutions as 21st century institutions in light of the market challenges that make these places, right, that present certain kinds of challenges to these places. Let me put it this way. It used to be the case that Tougaloo had a captured population. We couldn't go to any place else. You couldn't go to Ole Miss. You couldn't go to Jackson State the same, but you can go to Jackson State or Mississippi Valley or Alcorn, right? But you couldn't go to Ole Miss. You couldn't go to Mississippi State. You couldn't go to USM, right? That's not the case anymore. Morehouse was Harvard of the South. That's because we couldn't go to Harvard in large numbers. Now Harvard is offering full scholarships. Williams is offering a full ride. Amherst and Princeton offering full scholarships. You come out with no debt. Oh, you should come to Morehouse because it's Morehouse. I mean, they're paying me to go to free. You're going to lose. So we have to reimagine ourselves. We have to reimagine what we're doing. You got to find that student in Moss Point who scored an 18 on the ACT. Me. You got to sit down and interview me, like Sterling Hudson did at Morehouse. And he said, "Oh my God, that's a diamond in the rough. He doesn't look right. He doesn't look like it on paper, but we need to bring him in here." You know what I mean? And I'm all over, people like me are all over Mississippi, aren't they? Yes.
This is really good. Attorney Howard, and of course, with your permission, Madam President and Dr. Glaude, we will get these last few questions, but Attorney Howard, we have someone in front of Attorney Howard, Mr. Johnson, and we'll end with Mr. Braxton over here.
I am a professor of assistant professor of political science and director of the Reuben V. Anderson Pre-Law program. And I try not to live in the past, but I learn from it. And if my parents were living, they'd be about 84, 85 years of age. And I listen to their stories. And one of the things that I learned is that one of the prevalent models for system change in their time was a call from a sovereign God, a response by a chosen people, and then a demonstration of power. And my question to you is, in this age of rugged individuality, because when I talk to my students, it's very different from talking to my parents. In this age of rugged individuality, does that model have any relevance to this day? Does that model of collective sacrifice have any relevance? And if it does, are there any? Who are the academic leaders at the forefront of that model?
I mean, that's a really interesting question. I mean, I would say rugged individualism, not rugged individuality, right? I would make that distinction. I would say yes, but it's very difficult to break through. I mean, neoliberalism is a beast. I mean, and the thing about it is, it's the pace of it. So if you could imagine Dr. King organizing in a context where there's Twitter, all of his mess would have been in the street. His moral authority would have been questioned almost immediately. We talk about Dr. King, but Dr. King was out there. And I'm bringing that up in the context, right? So to organize under these conditions is very different. So I was in Ferguson, right, for a little bit. I went down there after the lights went off, and I met DeRay and Netta and several organizers. And what I was struck by was the pace of incorporation. So when you think about the 60s and the 70s, the 50s and the 60s, and of course that's made possible not just simply by World War II veterans coming back home, it's made possible by what was going on in the 20s and 30s. Right? Imani Perry has a new book coming out, May We Forever Stand, tells the history of Lift Every Voice and Sing, which gives us a sense of black institutional life in the 20s and 30s that make the 50s and the 60s intelligible to us. It's really brilliant. But you think about, it wasn't, until Nixon and those block grants and that we begin to see incorporation. It took a minute. It took a minute for it to happen. It was happening, but it wasn't instantaneous. I mean, that was in essence. Alicia, Patrice, and Opal were in Cosmopolitan. DeRay was on Colbert. I mean, it was like that. And so the idea of collective struggle in the context of the time, the quickness of forces of incorporation are really interesting and complex. And those forces demobilize collective action in interesting sorts of ways by offering us individual bribes. All right? So, now that's not to say that there aren't collective efforts. You look at the Dream Defenders and what they've been doing in Florida. They specifically got off of social media, right, for a moment. This is, Brother Umisela, who was formerly known as Philip Agnew, who changed his name almost like Bob Moses did because he was getting too much, right? And the kind of organizing that they've been doing, I found myself in an old Baptist retreat in Central Florida with Robin Kelly, I'm repressing her name, and another former organizer, Snick, and we were just sitting down talking with the organizers of Dream Defenders as they were trying to imagine collective struggle. So it's happening. It's just happening in very localized ways. Now the question is, how will they then deploy their skill set to network across the country? You see? I was going to say it again. Short answer is that yes, it is possible. It's just so difficult. But what's interesting is how innovative and imaginative this generation is. I have so much faith. Y'all see how courageous these people are? I mean, they're looking these cops straight in the face and not blinking. I remember a brother we were in Ferguson, and I went to this action, and it was right where Vonderit was killed. And they said he was behind a bush, and there were no bushes there. And this brother, he was tatted up here, and he got to trying to explain why they needed to organize. And he was a bricolage. He was drawing on Egyptian, grandness of Egyptian civilization to, Gramsci, trying to find language to mobilize people. And then when they started marching, FOP, F the police. And I'm like, wow. And then I was walking behind him, and I had to kind of move because the contact was kind of hard. It's kind of hard, It It wasn't this display of respectability. It's a different kind of politics, but it was collective through and through. Right? So yes, it's just complex. Professor of philosophy from Mississippi State.
Dr. Anthony Neal. Also a graduate of Morehouse, and
Indeed.
you've made dear old Morehouse proud tonight.
Thank you, sir.
My question has more to do with in the professional world, especially in what you are doing now. You know, Mississippi, because of its past, has become kind of a metaphor for a particular type of person, especially a particular type of black person.
Right.
So can you speak to if there's ever been a time where you've wanted to do something or you've wanted to be in certain spaces, and when people found out you were from Mississippi, they wanted to diminish you in some kind of way, even other black people have wanted to do that?
You know, to be honest with you, I cannot remember it. I might be repressing it on purpose, you know? I think I ended the talk by talking by this, you know, let me say it this way. So no, you know what Ralph Waldo Emerson said, y'all? He said, God speaks to us through our imaginations. And whenever I say that, I always think, if that's true, then what is the devil doing? He's trying to attack our imaginations. And one of the things that we do is we conspire with it. The world conspires to make us small. And the question is whether or not you're going to be an accomplice in it. You see? So I remember almost burned down the house reading my first book, The Sword of Shannara by Terry Brooks, under my bed. I had a candle. I didn't want nobody to find me, so I had a candle, and I got under the bed, and I was reading this 600-page novel and almost burned down the bed. Just always, and my parents, my dad, who's a very interesting black man who was rough on me, scared the hell out of me. I'm still dealing with those wounds. But he had this insistence that I see myself beyond Moss Point. And then I had my mama, who had to deal with my daddy, who loved me unconditionally. And then I had my great-grandmama, who said, baby, come here. She had those arms that you could just feel. And she made the best Kool-Aid on the planet. And then I got to Morehouse. And I remember Dr. Aaron Parker saying, boy, what you gonna do with your life? When you gonna get it out the trash can? And then I had Dr. Barksdale, who saw that I could read and think, right? Said, okay, all right. Then I get to Temple, and I'm with Asante, and Asante saw something in me. And then Cornel West heard me at a conference, and he said, come on and study with me. And I had never experienced anything like that. All my heroes were dead in books. And Cornel he would walk into a room, listen, and he would go, the best thing, Brother Eddie, he said, I know their tradition like the back of my hand, but they don't know mine. And it empowered me. So the question is, I've never been an accomplice to people making me small. I'm a grand Negro. And so, when you make that move, that means you can walk into the library of the universe and be at home. When you make that move, when you get out, when you resist somebody trying to pigeonhole you, say that your tradition is just you talking about black people, then what is Dostoevsky doing? What is Chekhov doing? What is Beckett doing? Beckett speaking from an Irish space. Chekhov speaking from a Russian space. I don't get the jokes of Gogol and Dead Souls, but he's speaking about something, about the human condition. When you get out of that, when you don't let them pigeonhole you, oh my God, what opens up? Then you can step into your tradition, not as a vindicationist. You're not trying to prove nothing to nobody. Right? You're just reveling in the life of the mind. You see? We can't be accomplices in the world making us small. ever. Ever. And the last thing I would say, unless there's another question, I come from Mississippi. This is fertile soil. Y'all know where we from? Everywhere I go, I tell them I'm from Moss Point, Mississippi. Right? This is rich, thick, rich soil. And we come out of this. And this is a metaphor for America. Right? This voice here, this blues note, the most unstable chord of the blues scale. Right? This is us. Right? I ain't giving that up for nobody.
We're going to wrap up with these last two questions. Mr. Jamil Johnson, and of course, the last one will be from Mr. Charlie Braxton. Jamil.
Y'all all right? Y'all been so patient? Thank you for being so patient with me.
I'm Jamil Johnson.
Hey, Jamil, pull it up a little bit more, man.
I'm a freshman, and my question mainly concerned how you talked about the culmination to Trump, and like, I wanted to know specifically how you felt as an academic and emotionally on the road of Barack Obama being elected, the rise of the Tea Party, the expansion into the Freedom Caucus, and ultimately the election of our current president. Well, like, what did you go through emotionally and as an academic?
Academically, I said, I got into a lot of trouble about this. I said Barack Obama was a Melvillian confidence man selling the snake oil of hope and change. Right? I got in a lot of trouble for that. So when, during that 8 years, y'all didn't see me on television. Right? And the reason why I said that is that I said he's not changing the frame. Oftentimes when we experience first, it's moments of retrenchment. Right? Whenever you have the first, there's kind of retrenchment going on underneath it. As the great Bob Moses told me once, he said, you see all these black superintendents, Brother Eddie? They sitting on top of all of that rot. Right? And so part of what I was worried about is that Barack Obama couldn't speak to the suffering of black people. So he would say to us, I'm the president of black America. I'm not the president of all America. I'm not the president of black America. I used to say, nobody asked you that. I'm asking you as a constituency that voted for you at 90+%, what you gonna do? You didn't say that to women when you signed the Lilly Ledbetter Act. You didn't say that to the LGBTQ community when you lit up the White House with the rainbow colors. What is it about black constituencies that we can't hail the state? Because we out here catching hell. Because, with the 2008 recession, it wasn't a recession for us. It devastated our communities. Many of us still haven't come out of it. So I was critical of Obama. And then, part of what I was saying is that, we need a more mature politics where we move out of, voting for Hillary Clinton because she might be the first woman. Like, yeah, but she's a hawk. Her military policies would devastate vulnerable women and children all over the world. What's your feminist politics? Let's be a little bit more nuanced in this, right? So the point that I've been making is that the ideological spectrum of the United States has narrowed, that it becomes almost impossible to give voice to a genuine progressive politics. It's from the far right to the center. Walter Mondale would be considered a radical today. That's how constricted it has become, how narrow it has become. So my charge has been, we have to imagine a different kind of politics. Think about this. We can't even make the claim that everyone should have health care without someone saying you can't pay for it. So you can't even articulate the commitment that everyone should have health care without someone undermining the commitment by saying you can't pay for it. It's not realistic. We can't even remember a time when capital punishment was not legal in the country. Folks don't even remember a time when people were talking about full employment, a living wage. All of this was in fact, these were viable political positions in the country. Yes. Now it makes you seem like you're just some wild, left-leaning, rabid leftist, right? So part of what my charge has been is that in the age of Trump, we need to do more than just simply denounce Trump. In this moment, we need to articulate or give voice to the kind of society we want to live in. Democrats will hustle you. They will play you.
Yes.
They come into our communities and treat us like we're cattle chewing cud. Black political leaders lead you to the polls like you don't have sense. Every 2 and 4 years, they just tell you to come out and vote for somebody. Hillary Clinton comes into your churches and says she puts hot sauce on her chicken. And then you say, but what are the particular policies that's going to address the poor of our community? How are you going to transform the circumstances of our community? Right? We need a different kind of politics. And I think you do it locally. That's what y'all trying to do in Jackson. That's what they're trying to do in places like Cincinnati. That's what they're trying to do in Atlanta. That's what happened in Birmingham, right? So we need to imagine a different kind of politics. They're going to come to us in 2018 and 2020. And they're going to tell us, look how bad Trump is. And then you're going to say, well, what exactly are you presenting as your policy positions? And you're going to see underneath it Wall Street money. You're going to see underneath it a bunch of political elites benefiting themselves, and the poor and working poor are going to still catch hell. I resist that world. And if people get mad at me, so what? I don't care. I got tenure.
All right.
We got to dare to put a radical vision out. We got a radical tradition in our community.
Yes.
I'm tired of all of this milquetoast liberal nonsense. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yes. My name is Charlie Braxton.
How you doing, Brother Braxton?
How you doing?
I'm blessed.
I want to talk about imagination for a second.
Sure.
And I want to talk about the role that that you feel the artist should play in shaping that imagination, because at the end of the day, this is a war of ideals. And neoliberalism, as you point out, has done a good job of shaping the ideals. What do you think that the role of the artist should be in combating this?
Oh, man. It's right there. I mean, I think that's a great question, you know. When I heard Brother Bennett sing, right, when I heard the way in which you interpreted Donny Hathaway, and by the way, my wife is from Kingston, it opens space, right? Art is associated with beauty, and beauty is tied to the good. Right? I mean, I don't want to go Aristotle on you, but beauty is tied to the good. Right? And so when we hear a sound, right? I mean, Morrison says, and she's echoing Nietzsche here, you know, sound precedes the word, right? Remember, she looks and she sees embodied history. I'm talking about Beloved now. She sees embodied history on the steps. And what does she do? She doesn't say, be gone. There's a guttural sound. Right? The sound opens up space. Right? So I think art is absolutely key. Right? Our art is absolutely key to opening up the imagination so that we can see ourselves otherwise. One of the most insidious dimensions of the world as we know it is that they want us to be reconciled with the world as it is. What is the prophetic at its core? The prophetic at its core is a fundamental belief in the as yet. What was it about the slave who had the ability to imagine, to see beyond the opacity of his or her condition? Nothing in her experience would give her the resources to imagine that life could be otherwise. Yet there was something in the imagination that allowed her to anchor her life's possibility on the as yet. That the world could in fact be different. Right? Artists can help us see that. And then we can act on it. Thank y'all.
Dr. Glaude, you have joined the ranks of many legends who have spoken here. Now, of course, Martin Luther King spoke from this very podium, Fannie Lou Hamer, Stokely Carmichael, Robert F. Kennedy, and in 2015, Angela Davis. Now, on October 26, 2017, we can say that Dr. Eddie S. Glaude Jr. spoke from this very podium. Again, we thank the audience for their questions and thank you for your patience. This has been a very enriching conversation this evening, and historic Tougaloo College will continue to serve as a beacon of hope and a catalyst for change. But at this time, we would like to bring to the podium the dynamic leader of this great institution, Dr. Beverly Wade Hogan, to make a presentation and also offer closing remarks. So if you would, please welcome to the podium Dr. Beverly Wade Hogan.
Well, good evening, good evening. What a fantastic evening this has been. I am so pleased that Dr. Glaude is here with us. He has brought us a lot of information, and I was sitting there and I said, this has been a soul-stirring, conscience-raising, and mind-expanding evening for all of us. And I know that each of us who's privileged to be here to hear his lecture and his remarks have benefited, but I am so especially grateful that my students, our students, had the opportunity to be exposed to Dr. Glaude and to vicariously study at your feet, so to speak. Will you join me at the podium at this time? And I'm going to ask Kiara Reed to assist me. We offer you a few gifts as our expression of our appreciation for your presence here this evening, for your sharing generously with us, for sharing your knowledge with our students and wider audience as you bring attention, your thought and consciousness to issues of injustices and inequalities and inequities and 21st century America today. So these gifts include a Tracy Sugarman print, a Sanctified Church Freedom School in 1960 Louisville, where the Greenville voters registration, voters' right demonstration took place. You also have in there a book, Mississippi, A View from Tougaloo, which contains reports of how the efforts were made, not only by Tougaloo, but people in this state, to change the political attitude and the racial climate in Mississippi. And lastly, you have coasters bearing the image of historic Woodruff Chapel. So you know, Dr. Glaude, we do not expect you to forget Tougaloo College. You've come to the land of free people, free thinkers, where social activism fertilized the soil of Tougaloo College. So we want you to come back again. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Throughout its storied past, social justice has been one of the prevailing cornerstones for Tougaloo College. Founded on the principles of freedom, justice, and equality, Tougaloo College continues today to educate for democracy. As we move toward our sesquicentennial anniversary in 2019, our stance and conversations on social justice and racial equity are still relevant in the 21st century, especially in light of the many realities we face today. Our colleges and universities, as change agents, game changers, laboratories for democracy, and yes, creators of the future, must address these issues that stifle our progress as a nation, our global competitiveness, and threaten to erode our democracy. Join Tougaloo College as we continue very intentional and critical conversations about these issues of social justice and racial equity in the 21st century. I say often today that the world is indeed changing, and we intend for Tougaloo College to lead the transition team, and we want all of you on our team. We can make a difference together. Thank you all for joining us this evening.
Thank you, President Hogan. And as we close out this evening's event, there's one last announcement. I would like to encourage all of our Tougaloo College family and friends to please go and visit the art gallery over in the Bennie G. Thompson Academic and Civil Rights Research Center after the program. We have a number of student hosts who will direct you to the building. But if you all would please join us in the singing of my alma mater, so many of our alma mater, Dr. Wilder.